Hello everyone, welcome. Nice to have you back. Boy, do I have something for you today. Something completely different. Today is, by the way, the 5th of September 2024. I don't know the reason why, but sometimes I don't know there is the hand of God guiding YouTube. I can't believe I'm saying that. Especially since in my channel, I don't know. That I have something, I'm thinking about something in my mind, okay, and I get my phone and there is something there that actually, I wouldn't say answer, but at least directs me to some lecture or something that is going to deal with what I'm thinking about. Well, you see, what I was thinking about was that, just sort of generally, and it's not the first time, but it's one of those times that with, what is going on in the Middle East and so on, and the Jewish people and the chosen people and so on, I'm thinking this question: why is it that God, or the Son of God, decided to incarnate at that particular time when he did, in that particular place, revealed himself to that particular people? And I don't know that you have ever thought about this, but I was thinking about this, as one does, and I couldn't find an answer, really. I mean, you can say, well, if he was going to do it, it would obviously had to be at some time, in some place, to some people. But that doesn't do it for me, because that would kind of leave it a little bit to chance, as it were. There had to be a reason why that time in that place, not before, not after, to the Jewish people, not to the Chinese or the Vikings or the Aztecs. No, those particular people were chosen at that particular time, at the time of the Roman Empire. Okay, so here I go, and I'm thinking about this, and I see in my phone a series of lectures, or lessons, as he says, by an Argentinian Catholic priest, who is also a historian, a lawyer, or everything, okay? And he's doing these lectures in Spanish, okay? But he has several, I think he has 8 on different topics. And the first one is to do with this particular question, and with the Greco-Roman world, and how, after the chosen people, he says that there was something in the Greco-Roman culture which had reached its apex of reason. I mean, think of Plato, think of Aristotle, that could go no further. And so even though God revealed himself totally to the chosen people, Israel, nevertheless, since he knew in any case that they would in time reject him, that he was in a certain way preparing this other culture, preparing it in a way that they would get that the preaching of the apostles, and they were ready to hear it and understand it. Remember in the gospel the sower who goes and sows the seeds at random, yes, throws the seeds. And some of them fell on fertile ground, others in rocky ground, others in between thorns, and so on. And this particular priest is going to say that yes, the Israel was the fertile ground, that is where he revealed himself completely, but since he was to be rejected, this other world was almost ready, was almost there, not quite, but they would understand it. It would be passed on, and they would understand the new law. I found that fascinating because he's going to deal with a little bit of history, what was going on in the Greco-Roman, in the Roman Empire, and he is also going to show how in the myths, in the mythology of Greece and Rome, you can actually see the same primordial traditions, and he's going to explain all that. How they were prepared, almost ready, not quite, but almost ready to accept and to understand what was going to be preached to them. It's fascinating. I had never thought of Greek and Roman myths in that way. I had always thought of, the Greeks and the Romans, they had all these gods, and those gods represented human qualities. So you had a god of love and the god of hate and so on. But I never saw it in this way that he explains it. So I'm going to share it with you. I must tell you that I wrote to him because he has series on other things. And I wrote to him saying whether he would, introducing myself and my little channel here and so on. And I said, would you be willing to come on and be interviewed? Although, he's very famous in Latin America and the Spanish-speaking world. And as a traditional Catholic priest, not long ago, he was on the news because he was also cancelled, and he was also this and that, and you know what's going on, you Catholics out there. But I said, the people in the Spanish-speaking world know of you, but this would be in English. I explained what I do and so on. And he replied within 24 hours, as a matter of fact. I was rather amazed at that. And he said, I have to decline, he said, because I do know English. I can read it and I can speak it, sort of. And he said, but an interview, I don't think I can do it. I don't have the vocabulary. I wouldn't be able to explain myself. And as a matter of fact, he said, I'm going to the United States there to speak here and there some place, and I'm going to try to bring my English up to date and see if I can practice it and so on. I said, okay, fine. I understand. I'll write to you again in 6 months. I'll give you 6 months to see how you can improve your English. And anyway, we left it at that. So, but I did tell him that I was going to try to share with you what he says in these lectures. And the first one is going to be about the chosen people, Israel, and then the Greco-Roman world. And he's going to talk a little bit about the history of the Roman Empire. We're going to bring it all together, easy to understand, and about the myths that he calls a primordial tradition that is not only in the Greco-Roman world, but in practically all the cultures share some sort of understanding. For example, the flood, you can find it written in many cultures that did not know Genesis, did not know the Old Testament at all. And nevertheless, they have the same things happening, sometimes in the form of myths, sometimes in the... Okay, so I'm going to share this with you because I hope you'll find it interesting. I certainly did, and that is why I'm sharing it with you. He starts by saying, quoting what during the Mass, the Catholic Mass, we read, it is read on the 24th of December, okay, day of Christmas, well, the 24th at night, yeah. But there is a reading that says, the calends of Christmas, in the year 5199 of the creation of the world, this is taken from scripture, when God created heaven and earth, in the year 2957 of the flood, from the flood, 2015 of Abraham, 1510 of Moses, and the departure of the people of Israel from Egypt, 1031 of King David, in the 65th week of Daniel's prophecy, in the 194, in the year 752 of the foundation of Rome, in the year 42 of the empire of Octavius Augustus, the world being at peace, in the 6th age of the world, Jesus Christ, the eternal God and Son of the eternal God, wanting to consecrate the world with his merciful blessings, and having been 9 months after his conception in the womb of his Holy Mother, he was born, made man, the Son of the Virgin Mary, in Bethlehem, and so on. Okay, so that is how he starts to talk about history. The question is, what was the world like at the time of the coming of Christ? Of course, the people of Israel were the main focus then, the chosen people at the time. It is important, he says, to at least place ourselves in the 1st century and, in Bethlehem of Judea, a village in a province of the Roman Empire, the province of Judea. If you look at Palestine, Judea would be on the south, Samaria on the middle part, and Galilee on the north. Okay, the province of Judea, which had asked voluntarily to be a member of the Roman Empire. This is interesting. Rome did not at that time, had not invaded Palestine or had ended up conquering it. No, the Jewish world, the Jewish people had asked to be part of the Roman Empire. And the question one may ask, perhaps all of us has asked this question at one time or another, why was that time chosen for God to become man, which is what I was thinking about, and precisely in Bethlehem? Why didn't he choose another period in time, another place? He could have done it, somewhere else. He could have done it even with the Jewish people. He could have done it when they were in Egypt or in exile in Babylon. And why the Jewish people are not the Persians or the Aztecs or the Vikings or the Chinese or anybody else? He says the final answer we may not obviously know definitely, completely, here on earth, but perhaps we can deduce some reasons for the incarnation at that time in that place. He talks about an author, a Protestant author, Ulrich Mann, who, he says, analyzed and talked about the fertile soil where Christ was going to be born from a cultural and a spiritual perspective. God expressly manifesting himself to the people of Israel. And this is the point that we need to bear in mind. Little by little, since the beginning of time, since the creation of the world until the incarnation, he says that some non-Jewish people were actually given some clues of those truths that were expressly revealed to the Jews, but that these other peoples might have been given some clues about those what we call primordial, initial, fundamental truths. To the Jews it was revealed openly, directly, like a torrent, like a storm, like a waterfall, yes, directly. The Old Testament, the prophets, the patriarchs, the kings. It was given to them, let's say, in a sort of clean way, without fogs or mists. Although it is also true that it was done gradually. When Moses asked God, when the Israelites ask me what your name is, what am I to tell them? This is in Exodus 3:14. And God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said, thus shalt thou say to the children of Israel, he who is sent me to you. That's the name of Yahweh. I am forever. Yeah. When he gave the tables of the law, he said he would treat them as his chosen people. But we have to remember also that it will be these same chosen people who in time will eventually reject him. We actually read it every day in the Holy Mass, in the Gospel of St. John, certainly in the traditional Mass. I don't know that they read it now or not, but at the very end of the Mass you always read the prologue, as it were, to the Gospel of St. John, that he came to his own, and his own did not receive him. This is in John 1:10. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, he gave them power to be made the sons of God, to them that believed in his name. Okay, so the point here is that there were a peoples who were chosen. They would reject him, and then that knowledge, that understanding, that opportunity would be passed on to people who had not been fertile soil as the Jews had been, but they were, let's say, perhaps not wholly barren, perhaps rocky ground. And here is what this Father Gabriel is going to explain. Was that so? Was the Greco-Roman world kind of almost ready to understand what was coming? Apt, half ready, as it were? So, in the first book, about the history of the Church, of the Catholic Church, the Acts of the Apostles, yes? If we want to start reading the history of the Church, perhaps the first one is the Acts of the Apostles. We read that St. Paul spoke to the Jews all day long about the kingdom of God, giving them all manner of testimonies and trying to persuade them to believe in Jesus Christ, all the teaching based obviously on the law of Moses and the prophets. And it says some were convinced by his words, but others refused to believe. And when they withdrew without reaching agreement, St. Paul said this single phrase: "True are the words that the Holy Spirit said of you through the prophet Isaiah, when he said of you, no matter how much they hear, they will not understand. However much they see, they will not know. For the heart of these people has hardened. They covered their ears and closed their eyes, for fear that their eyes would see. If their eyes had seen, their heart would comprehend, and they would convert." Know that this salvation will be announced to the pagans, he said, the Gentiles, and they will listen to it. So this is why during the first centuries of the Church, and especially in the times of Christendom in Europe, the synagogue, that is the Jewish people, were sometimes represented. You can see this in some cathedrals in Europe, certainly in Notre Dame in Paris. So you see the church and the synagogue, certainly Notre Dame, is represented as both women, but the synagogue with her eyes sort of blindfolded, as it were, as if they were covered, meaning not wanting to see or receive the arrival of the Messiah. And the people of Israel, who were the chosen people, became from then on, from that rejection, the people persecuted. Sometimes, says this author, Ulrich Mann, self-persecuting. We can read this in the liturgy in the days of the liturgy during the Passion, when they say, "Let his blood fall upon us and on our children." So, as I said, in Notre Dame, you will see this, and many other cathedrals, the synagogue blindfolded, the crozier on her right hand almost broken, the tables of the law sometimes almost falling, the old law. And St. Thomas Aquinas said, from that moment, upon the rejection, that the old law is mortua and mortifera. Spiritually. Why? Because the Messiah came. I will get to the Greco-Roman world in a second, but just to place ourselves, the Messiah came, the old law being a preparation for the new law. When the new law came, that was the one that we were to follow. If you want to read a book, of course it is fine to if you're going to read the book, it's fine to read the introduction or the prologue to the book. Sometimes it's actually essential for you to get an understanding of the whole book, but it is no longer enough to just know that introduction. It's not enough to know the whole book, to know what the whole book is about. And St. Paul says in the Acts of the Apostles, in chapter 28, he says, it will no longer be the chosen peoples, the initially chosen peoples, the ones who are going to receive the complete revelation. For now it will go to the pagans, for they will listen. These are the words of St. Paul, which are quite harsh. So, the chosen ones will no longer, what he's saying is, will no longer be simply the Jewish people. From then on, the chosen peoples will be the whole of humanity, the peoples of the entire world for whom he came. No longer a race, a nation, but universal mankind, everyone. From there, therefore, the word Catholic, universal. As St. Paul says, no longer just, not to discriminate, neither Jew or Greek, nor man or woman, nor free or slave. The message of Christ would from then on be open to all of humanity. But the question was, what were these Gentiles like, these pagans, at the time that this was being passed on to them? They were hearing this preaching for the first time, this evangelical good news. What was the world like when God incarnated? And for this, we have to speak a little bit, however succinctly, about a little bit of the history of Rome and what was happening in that empire at that time. The Roman Empire really has been the most, perhaps, important government organization of all the history, east, west, north, south. But it became huge, obviously, but its coming together, its consolidation had not been easy. After many bloody wars and battles and struggles, external and internal, and a civil war that ended with the death of Julius Caesar, in the year 44 of our era, the empire is going to divide. The whole empire is going to be divided in three large sections, three large parts. There is going to be a triumvirate formed by, that's three people ruling, one by a general of Julius Caesar. His name was Lepidus, and he's going to rule the whole of the northern part of Africa. Mark Antony, look at the Mediterranean, is all everywhere, north of Mediterranean, south of the Mediterranean, east, all the way to Iraq, almost Persia, Parthians. So that was the northern African part would be Lepidus. Mark Antony, his former right hand, Julius Caesar, he's going to take the east and the Roman Asia, as it were, Asia Minor. And Octavius, who was barely 18 years of age, his political heir, he was actually his sister's grandson, he's going to keep Europe. Okay, so fairly soon they will start fighting, and this three-men rule, this triumvirate, is going to go from three large parts into two, a diarchy. Lepidus had wanted to increase his power, take Octavius's part. He will lose against both Octavius and Mark Antony. But shortly after, in the famous Battle of Actium in the year 32 BC, Mark Antony and Octavius Augustus, as he will become known, are going actually to decide the future of the empire. Octavius will win over Mark Antony and Cleopatra, his lover, and he will become the only heir and the sole lord of what is known or would be known as the Holy Roman Empire. Now, with time and, you might say, a lot of patience, Octavius Augustus will also begin to master and dominate and lord over many border regions of the empire, and actually pacify them, civilize them, as they said. Even the most unruly nations, such as the Parthians, Persians, Germania in the north, Gallia, the Gauls, the French, Franks, they're still unruly. But finally, all these conquered territories, equally organized, would be for a while at peace. Rome had always respected the customs of and the religions and the gods of all these other territories that they were civilized. Actually, it's one of the empires that most respected actually this diversity, not because they were better or worse than anybody else, not because they were tolerant, not because of human rights, not because of anything else, but because they were pragmatic about it. It was a political issue, okay? It was a political strategy. The empire was so huge that they couldn't micromanage the little, everyone's god and everyone's religion. So they allowed the people to have their gods and to have their religions. Okay? So they would have a sort of a local religious government, as it were, and then a Roman emperor who was the one who governed officially, politically, legally, and so on. So they would allow people their own little idiosyncrasies, as it were. Okay? At the time of Christ's death, we know that political head in Judea was Pontius Pilate. So all the territories organized in a now peaceful way, in peace, and we are going to reach a unique era in time in Rome, in the history of Rome, that is normally called the Pax Romana or Pax Augusta, a period of time when there were no wars. The empire had reached the point in terms of its dominion, its reach, its political extension, that for a short moment, actually, even the doors of the Temple of Genius were closed. What is that? Might not mean very much to us to have the doors of a temple closed. It meant that the doors to the temple of the god Janus, if they remained open, as they always were, it meant that in one particular zone, in one particular area in the empire, that particular territory was at war. There was always one particular place where there was war. And at this particular time, there were no wars anywhere in the empire, and the temple doors to Janus were closed. Janua is door, yeah? So the god had two faces, war and peace, sadness, joy, okay? So since there was no war, the doors were closed. One writer of the time, Titus Livius, we know him in English as Livy, tells us that had happened only in 2 moments in history, that these doors had been closed. Others too, the poets Horace and Virgil, talk about the same thing, the closing of the temple doors. Twice, but the main one, the longest, was during this time of the Emperor Octavius Augustus, the great emperor who lived and reigned for a very long time as the head of the empire. Now, as always happens, every peaceful period in a country's history or an empire, if you are at peace, normally there is a period of prosperity. You're not spending money on war, so you can invest it at home. Yeah, so it is, since you are at peace, commerce and industry and art grows. And so much so, at this time, with the Emperor Augustus, that there came a time when a huge commercial and economic surplus, that's what he had, huge economic surplus. Everyone was paying tribute, everyone was paying taxes, no war, and the empire grew and grew even demographically. And so the emperor, because he had grown so much, the emperor one time had a thought that he didn't actually know how many people lived in the empire. He didn't actually know what the situation was in all these territories with the people. Were they poor? How many indigent people perhaps lived? So he had this idea, he conceived this idea of having a census, yeah? And we know it from the Bible. That census was the one in the Gospel of St. Luke, that where Mary and Joseph had to go. They had to go to the town of Bethlehem because of this census that the emperor had decreed. They went to Bethlehem because it was in the paternal house where you had to register. So from Nazareth to north of Palestine, okay, there would be to Jerusalem about 170 kilometers that they would have to have walked, and then back again, to come back. So this census actually is going to determine, among other things, the number of poor people that there are in the empire. And because of this surplus, the emperor actually decides that he will actually donate a gift to the poor of the empire. And he actually gives the poor, sometimes they say the indigent, so I don't know the degree of poverty, but anyway, the indigent, he's going to give each one of them a golden denarius. I didn't know what to, you always read the denarius, okay, but how much, my initial thought was, well, how much was a denarius really, and a golden denarius, and how much would it be worth today? Well, I went to look it up. I didn't really spend a lot of time, just a couple of minutes, but what I saw immediately, I thought, well, I don't have time for this, but in some places they say it would be 1 day wage, which wasn't really very much. And in other places they say 4 months' wage. And in some other places I read it would be like the equivalent of $1,500 today, something like that. Anyway, whatever it was, I didn't have time to. Okay, but whatever it was, if it was given to the poor, that was very welcome indeed. You know, it would tide you over, certainly. A golden denarius. Also, all the routes to Rome. Yeah, we still have that sentence today of all roads lead to Rome. There's going to be something unique here in this empire. They even called the Mediterranean Sea Mare Nostrum, our sea. Such was the power on land and the power at sea. And that empire is going to be the empire that will allow, before the persecutions, obviously, but at that time, allow evangelization to begin. The good news, the teaching of the gospel. Okay, so there are roads, well organized, order, also a common language. And a common language is not actually Latin. A common language is Greek, but is not literary Greek, is simple common folk Greek, ordinary common Greek. Why? Well, don't have the time to go into great detail, but it was a lot of the empire had been under the rule of Alexander, Alexander the Great. And Rome was obviously not foolish. It would usually take, when they went and took territories, they would not necessarily throw away those civilizations and those religions and so on, as I said at the very beginning. They would take whatever was valuable and accept it, okay? So this common Greek language is something that they accepted. It actually became the official language of the Roman Empire, certainly in the eastern part, and then eventually in the west too. And if you go to Rome, you will find that in some places there are still postings, certainly in the catacombs, with writings, the catacombs, writings in Greek, in this common Greek, simple Greek. And you ask, what is the meaning of this? I mean, I'm in Rome. Why am I seeing writings in Greek? Because it was, at the time, the lingua franca, the one language that they all understood. Some better, some worse, perhaps, but everyone understood it. In the Rome of the 4th century, you speak and write, sometimes very much as a foreign language, but you write in common, simple Greek. Cicero himself, actually, his memoirs are written in Greek, not in Latin. Why? Because he wanted it to reach more people than his usual commentaries. Okay, and that is why the Gospels were written in Greek, originally in Greek. The Gospel of St. John's, you know, the Logos, all that is in Greek, common Greek. Some people sometimes, it's a question, why when Jesus died on the cross, it was written there, it was written, Jesu Nazarenus Rex Judiorum, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Yeah. Well, the scribes and the Pharisees came very quickly. No, not the King of the Jews. Write that he said that he is the King of the Jews, to which Pontius Pilate said, what is written, written is. But it was written in the 3 languages, in Hebrew, in Greek, and in Latin. the three languages that in Palestine a person could understand. Hebrew, the sacred language, yes, but most of the people did not know it. It was something like Latin for us. The people spoke Aramaic, which was the local language, a dialect, if you want, but the language that people spoke. It would be similar to, for example, saying that French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese are dialects of Latin, which they are really, okay? So that is what people spoke, Aramaic. But Latin they didn't know very well either, okay? It was the official language of the empire, but it was the bureaucratic language, the official language, the legal language. But Greek was something that practically all understood. It's a little bit like English. Yes. And at least they comprehended it. If you lived in the Roman Empire at the time, you would understand Common Greek. And this is why the language in which the evangelists wrote the Gospels was not Aramaic, was not Hebrew, nor Latin, but Greek, the language of the Bible, of the New Testament at any rate. And all the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, St. John, write in Greek, but Greek as a foreign language. Yeah. The exception is Luke. St. Luke was himself Greek, so that is why his writing is so much better, more accomplished, more elegant, more stylized, as it were. But it was the language that was used to spread the good news. So back to our emperor, Octavius Augustus. Here we are. There was unity in the empire. The empire had been civilized. There was linguistic unity. There was a certain cultural unity too. And Augustus, and this is kind of a unique case, is actually a topic that is quite fascinating, the Emperor Augustus. Okay, he had pacified the empire, and he remained obviously the great heir to Julius Caesar. He's going to take all power, all military power, all political power. He will become the most powerful person in the whole world, in the whole known world. To the point, he was very much respected too by the Senate, to the point that the Roman Senate, thinking of him, respecting him, being in awe of him, thinking of him as this amazing, fabulous man, not only because of his political skills, which he had, not only because he was a very good political strategist, which he was, but also because apparently he was a kind of a nice guy. They spoke of him as vir prudens, a prudent gentleman, a prudent leader, which in politics, prudence is quite a lot. we wish. Prudent. So the Senate, because of all this, decided to grant him a title, a special title among the Romans, the title of divus, the divine. The senators had actually the power of granting this title, divine, to a person whether he was dead or alive. And because of his great fame and popularity, let's say, the Senate proposed to him or consulted with him or perhaps even almost imposed upon him because they simply asked him, when was the best time for them to proclaim him divine. Yeah. Now, because he was prudent, and that is why he survived for so long, not foolish or stupidly arrogant, which is the temptation when you have especially soul power. To maintain yourself with your feet on the ground is quite an accomplishment. He knew he was mortal, in other words. He didn't particularly want the title. Why not? Because he was prudent, because he thought that it was a little bit too much of an overreach, a little bit, okay, so perhaps in Rome, yes, they were used to it, but in the other places of the empire, that would go against some religions. You know, to actually throw incense at him could mean trouble in other places. He thought, I don't think that this is going to play well with a lot of people. Okay, I'm fine. I don't need to be called divine. I'm doing great. Okay, so he wasn't particularly happy with all that. He knew that there would be most probably future complications, okay, future divisions in the empire. It could be one of the reasons why something could start, okay. So he didn't particularly want it. But he was also a good politician, and so he didn't want to say no right away. The Senate could, feel offended or something. So he was trying to find a little bit of an excuse. And he thought of something, throw a little bit of a spanner into the works there. What did he think of? Okay, it was common among the Greeks and the Romans to go from time to time, especially for political expeditions, wars and so on, to go from time to time to a group of women who were in the temples. They were the sort of the sacristans, as it were, of the temples, okay? And they were called Sibyls. They were prophets or prophetesses, or if that word exists. Specific, dedicated to specific temple, okay? The temple of Apollo, the temple of Pallas Athena, and so on. There were virgins dedicated to this, and sometimes they would go into with the oracles, okay, they would go into a trance, and then they would impart, what we know as oracles, something mysterious about it. Now, this most people nowadays laugh at these things. I have heard, people saying, well, they were probably smoking something and they would come up, especially because it would never be decisive what they said. It would always be ambiguous, and it could be read in a manner of ways, and that is enough for our Western mind now to say, well, yeah, okay, so they could please anybody, this and the contrary. But you have to read a little bit more into it. They could be interpreted in different ways. Yes, the explanations were not clear, but they would speak in a mysterious, in an obscure way, okay? So it could be interpreted, okay, in different ways. I just don't want to throw them aside as a joke and just say that they were smoking something. There was a sort of a tradition there for generations, and I just want to take them a little bit more seriously than just discard them altogether. Okay. Now, Augustus, when they brought to him the news that they were going to make him divine, to deify him, he knew very well that he did not have a double nature, a divine nature. So he told them that, fine, thank you very much, but I'm going to consult a Sibyl first. Now, we know this is found in classical literature. We can find it in a classical Christian author, Lactantius. He lived later from 250. He had been an advisor to the Roman Emperor Constantine. He had guided his Christian religious policies and so on. Anyway, what happened here, many writers have written about it, but certainly this Lactantius. And he writes, at the time of the Emperor Octavius Augustus, seeing the senators so much prosperity and peace in the empire, and that the whole world paid tribute, they told him, we wish to worship you as divinity, for divinity is within you. Were it not this the case, the times would not be so propitious. But Augustus opposed this, so he opposed this. So he went to consult this pagan Sibyl prophetess, who at times had certain gifts of telling you what you must do or you must not do. Let's put it that way. All right, so Augustus went to consult the one in Tivoli, which is a very small little town just outside Rome, about 30 kilometers northeast of Rome. These women were consulted at times of great public difficulties to recommend solutions to problems. They would do it with religious ceremonies and so on. They would do expiations. Anyway, there were two major ones who were very, very famous. This one in Tivoli, and the one very, very famous was the Sibyl of Cumae, near the Gulf of Naples, very near Naples. That was one, and the other one, this one, the Sibyl of Tibur or Tiburtina, or the Sibyl of Tivoli, Now, why do I say that perhaps we shouldn't just discard them right away? Sometimes the Church has not equated them, but thought of the prophets God revealed to the Jews, through the prophets and so on. That's the real thing, But the preparation of the new world, I want to say the new world, that is America, but this preparation, these clues, these guidelines within the Greco-Roman world, and they put some Sibyls opposite the prophets. If you go to the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, you will see on one side a prophet, on the other side a Sibyl. Both sides. Michelangelo wanted to put it in this way, that just like the prophets prophesied, if you forgive the repetition, in the world of Israel, the Sibyls, much more imperfectly, but nevertheless, were also to a certain extent in the pagan world the seers. Now, sometimes it could be a bunch of rubbish, perhaps, but not always. I'm going to give you an example, not always. So Augustus goes to see this Sibyl, and he explains to her that the Senate wanted to deify him. He explains everything, and she will ask for a few days to give her reply, her oracle. And after, this is written not in the Gospels, obviously it's not Christian literature, but it is written in classical literature. After 3 days of fasting, She actually went to see the emperor herself. In a building, a particular chamber that the emperor had, in a building that was actually in one of the 7 Roman hills, the Capitoline Hill. Yeah, I'll read you the narration from classical literature. It says that she said to him, "Emperor, this is what will happen. It is not appropriate for you to be deified. For from heaven there will come a king for the future centuries, although made man, to judge the world." And suddenly, in that room, it says that the heavens opened and a great splendor flooded, enveloped everything. And in heaven, a very beautiful young woman was seen on an altar, a child in her arms. Excuse me. Amazed, astounded, in awe, the emperor heard a voice that said, "This is the ara," the altar, "of the Son of God." And Emperor Augustus prostrated himself on the ground and worshipped him, and went to the Senate and told them what had happened. This is written. And told them that he could not possibly accept being deified. Told them of this vision. Many marveled. And this happened in the chamber. Of course, it could all be a lie. Yeah, okay. But okay, allow me to take you. This happened in the chamber of Emperor Augustus. Now there is a church there, the Church of Santa Maria of the Capitol. It is better known as Santa Maria in Araceli. If you ever go to Rome and you see the monument to Vittorio Emanuele, just round the corner you will see a tiny, tiny little church. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous. It's actually where Italians from that area all get married. It's a beautiful little church, okay? And in that same place, Octavius Augustus, after this vision, he will order immediately to build a temple there. Something about God. He didn't know which God, but there was certainly one God there that was coming, and so he just built a temple to this God. He didn't know what's happening, didn't have a clue, but he built a temple to this God. Because he said, God is being born in some place or other in my empire. God is being born right now in some place within my empire. I myself cannot possibly be deified. And he said it's going to be of a virgin. I will come back to this about virgin, because although today many people have problems understanding it, to the Romans and the Greeks, this idea of being born of a virgin was not at all weird. It is found in so many of their myths, and I'm going to come back to the Greek myths and to see, okay? So this was not strange, it was not insane. They could, oh, yeah, okay. They had heard it many times in their myths, okay? So we're going to see in a minute why. So he said, let's build a temple to this virgin who is going to give birth, okay? And of course I will tell the Senate not to deify me. Now, by the way, in this same little church, there is buried the Emperor Constantine's mother, Saint Helena. So, okay, so what happened next? Well, the Senate, in any case, did go ahead and deified him, made him divine, and so now we read about the divine Augustus, who pacified the empire and so on. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go back to what is important here. Revelation was given in a direct way to the people of Israel, yes? But the pagan peoples, the Gentiles, as this author I quoted at the very beginning, this Protestant author, Woolrich man, he says that God also had given these pagan peoples some clues, some guidelines, not as directly as he did to the Jews, but indirectly, because it was not just a matter of having created them, just letting people sort of by themselves to the mercy of God, abandoned. If salvation was one day going to be granted to them, the possibility of it, if they were going to be given the possibility of being saved by his own Son, who would come into this world, perhaps some clues, he puts it that way, would have been given too. In a soil that was not wholly fertile, but perhaps not totally barren. Knowing, in any case, that his own people would betray him. And this author points out again that God revealed, he does this in many ways, that God revealed himself directly to the Jews, but not so to the rest of mankind, but indirectly, and to some more than others. And he gives as a metaphor, only as a metaphor, a way of explaining, a beautiful image, as a matter of fact, what God did with other peoples. And he brings to mind the image of one river in Asia Minor, the river Meander. Perhaps that is where we get the meandering, to meander from, which is a river actually quite dirty, that runs through a great part of Asia in different ways, and sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it is overground, sometimes it is underground. It's visible and invisible. It comes and this. All right. It carries with it a lot of. It's not very clean. It carries with it a lot of mud, rocks, dirt, but has one single little thing that is important, this river, and that is that the river Meander in southern Asia Minor, now Turkey, always carries a small thin thread like a trickle of pure water. And this author suggests that this is what seems to have happened with some cultures. Some cultures higher, more developed than other cultures. And certainly the Greco-Roman culture had reached its apex at that time. St. Thomas Aquinas says that it that culture actually articulated many truths gradually, sometimes gropingly, always seemed to walking after or behind the truth without fully possessing it. And that is why in this world, at that time, the Son of God decided to incarnate, to become man. Let's go a little bit further into this. He didn't do so before, he didn't do so after, but he will take this material substrate to descend to earth. And this image then serves to judge, evaluate positively the Greco-Roman world, that little trickle of pure water among all the rest of the stuff. What is that? It is certain truths that they had received, the Greeks and the Romans, albeit remotely, but that primitive, if you like, that primitive revelation, that primordial tradition, when God created the first couple, a man and a woman, then original sin, and then the divisions that will bring, Cain and Abel, not to mention then Babylon, the people will divide, and those to whom is brought the complete whole truth, it's going to be the people of Israel. Fine. However, the rest of the peoples still have a memory, however remote, of that time. Collective memories of the past. Let me give you an example, collective memories. Take a fairy tale, okay? The fairy tale of the beautiful princess. The evil grandmother or witch or whatever found that he was really a true princess because she had put a pea under, I think it was 7 mattresses to find out whether she was a real princess or not, and she did. A beautiful princess is, riding on a horse, and then she fell off the horse, and it was pouring with rain and so on. She had to walk for a long time to the palace of this beautiful prince, okay, and asked to be let in and said that she was a princess. And of course they didn't believe her, but then the prince came and saw that she was so beautiful, and so he said, let her in. And he was almost falling in love with her, so the evil mother, stepmother, whatever, said, I'm going to find out for sure if she is a real princess. So she placed a little pea under 7 mattresses. And the next morning she said, how did you sleep? And she said, not very well. There was something there. And then she realized that she was really a princess. Okay. Collective memories. Why do you not burst out laughing when you hear that? At best we smile, a nice smile, sad smile, understanding smile. We understand. What is it that we understand? A collective memory, something about the times when prince and princess, and they had this beautiful couch and cushions and things. That's where they slept. Not us, we slept on the floor, out in the barn. But we understand, it's a different way of understanding 2 and 2 make 4. We understand. Yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about? That makes us almost respect the tale. We have some sort of association there. Same thing, for example, a 4-year-old. Okay, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an astronaut, a policeman, a firefighter, Cristiano Ronaldo, the President of the United States. Why do you not burst out laughing? Because you're hearing that with the ears and the eyes of innocence, of the beginning of time, the beginning of the... Okay, if you are very pricky and you are his father, you can perhaps say, look here, son, that is not possible, and I'm going to tell you, oh, come on. But Granddad will smile and say, yeah, why not? Seeing the world with the eyes of innocence, of when the world was young, collective memories. And so, for some reason, in many completely different cultures, the flood, for example, is told in most of them. The story of Adam and Eve is told in many of them. They will not call them that, but it's the same thing. And I'm going to show it to you in Greek mythology. There are certain things that happened, okay, that remain there. Okay, so forget about fairy tales. I don't know that that was a good example. But look, when you read Plato, all right, Plato, okay, Plato, 4th century BC, obviously not a Christian, obviously never read Genesis or the Old Testament. Plato is Greek, Athens. I mean, Plato is Athens itself, okay, pure Athens. Okay, so Plato has a book. It is an unfinished dialogue, and it is called The Atlantida. About Atlantida. What is this Atlantida? And Plato talks about this. It's a very simple story. It is unfinished, but in any case, there was a time when men and gods alike lived together in harmony, peacefully. But due to an initial disobedience by man, the gods punished man and sent a great deluge, a flood. And it goes on. What does this remind you of? He goes on to explain, to talk about the flood, the universal flood, deluge. That, as I said, you will find it not only in Greek culture, you will find it in many cultures, things that are in common with all of them. Where did this come from? They didn't know the Bible, they didn't know Genesis. It comes from a collective, primordial tradition, that primordial collective memory from generations back. Something happened in the world and they all kind of shared it. So the Greco-Roman culture was almost, not quite, but almost as if prepared, apt, open to the divine. But it could not go any further back, nor did it had the revelation. So you could say that the intelligence of that culture had reached a point, an apex, a summit. Reason could not really go any further. We have Aristotle, Aristotle, the disciple of Plato. Our Christian ethics today, actually John Paul II said at one time that Aristotle's ethics were Christian ethics. It's a wonderful sentence. Christian ethics in a totally pagan world, 3rd century BC. Do good, avoid evil, the virtues, the passions, the habits, all this is in Aristotle. Then, of course, the church will sort of Catholicize him or Christianize him, update him with Thomas Aquinas. But Thomas Aquinas is 100% Aristotelian. Okay. Our morals today are not contrary. They are kind of the same, or should I put it the other way? His morals in the year 330 BC are not opposite at all to our Christian morals today. They are kind of the same. Where did he get all this himself? I mean, think about it. We ourselves find it hard to, with all the information, with all the revelation, the 10 Commandments, everything, with all that we have, we find it difficult to follow them. He didn't have any of that. Where did he get it from? There is something there. And it is postulated here, but that God prepared those people too in that culture. Father Gabriel here, when he's giving this lecture, he's Argentinian, he's Latin American, and he said, now, when I say superior culture, the Greco-Roman culture, that is what I mean. And I do not apologize, and it is not a question of discriminating. In our continent, pre-Columbian times, okay, we didn't even know the will. We didn't have a written system of writing. The Aztecs worshipped the sun, not the only ones, that's okay, worshipped the sun, but they thought that the setting of the sun, that the sun, in order to shine, needed blood. And so when it was set in the evening, they needed to feed him more blood in order for the sun to come out the next day. And they always pictured him with his tongue out, sort of thirsty for more blood. And of course the Aztecs would not sacrifice their own. They would go and always in raids to get other tribes, people from other tribes, to come and sacrifice them. This was going on every day. Every day the sun needed more blood. Okay? And so this Latin American person is saying, look, I do not have a problem saying that the Greco-Roman culture was superior to ours. Some are, some are not. We didn't even know the will, and we were sacrificing. Okay, so he's not apologizing for that. He feels that the Greco-Roman world actually had reached that point that was ready, almost ready for understanding what was going to be preached to them. He says that when the Jesuits first went there were so many of these religions sacrificing to all kinds of horrid beings, that there is a writing that says before we start evangelizing, we'll have to do a lot of exorcising here. Anyway, that's another point. He's Latin American himself, so he's not putting his people down. He's just saying, I have no problem accepting that the Greco-Roman culture had reached an apex. I mean, if you put Plato and Aristotle there, I have no problem. Okay, so let's move on. So, when we think of Greek sculpture, poetry, Greco-Roman, mathematics, geometry, and I think of my own continent, well, pre-Columbian, there's no. Okay, so let's move on. In the Greco-Roman world, at the time of the incarnation, that culture had reached an apex. It was a very high culture. Culture, not technical knowledge, not technology. Those are two different things. But culture. The incarnation of the Lord is going to represent then the appearance of the supernatural order on a natural basis. And perhaps God had waited for that moment and not another. The first apostles understood clearly this evangelical preparation that this culture had. St. Paul and St. Barnabas chose deliberately the Gentile world to preach the good news, understanding that within paganism there already was a very valuable notions understanding that could not be discarded or ignored. On the contrary, it was there and it had to be elevated. St. Paul is the first one to give a very positive assessment, maintaining that the ancient Greeks and the Romans were almost, he said, preordained, not ordained like the Jews, but preordained to salvation. Let's see some examples of all this. Okay, primordial tradition. And I will come back to, I'll have to come back to this, but this preparation, this little trickle of pure water in the Meander River, these truths foreseen before the incarnation are the ones known in the history of Christian patristics as Semina Verbi, the seeds of the word. Semina Verbi. As the sower, as I said at the beginning, as the sower in the parable, who went to sow seeds, and sows at random, and some fall on fertile ground, others on rocky ground, others among thorns. The sower went out to, in the reflexive, sow himself. He went out to sow himself. And of course, the people of Israel had the direct, most fertile ground, others more rocky. But at the moment of the incarnation, at the moment of evangelical preaching of Jesus Christ and by his apostles, it is the Greco-Roman world that will always have the upper hand if you're going to compare it with other cultures. And that is why it will make the right choice. It will become fertile. Okay, so that it can be understood, but it might sound a little bit heretical on first hearing. From the moment that the peoples of Israel renounce and deny the Messiah, that is what St. Paul says. Yes, he says that their eyes are blind. They have eyes and do not see. They have ears and do not hear. Those chosen people, that chosen people is no longer Israel, but is now going to be transferred to the Greco-Roman world. In fact, why one is going to understand how it was possible and how quickly 12 poor men, 12 fishermen, servants in Galilee, in a very few years are going to convert almost an empire like the Roman Empire. There were Christians already in Rome even before St. Peter died. The empire is going to convert. Yes, the persecutions are coming. They will come. But the empire, it was becoming fertile ground, is going to convert. And this providential preparation, then this trickle of pure water, are the Semina Verbi, the seeds of the word. This phrase was, by the way, coined by a father of the church in the 2nd century, Saint Justin Martyr. Other fathers of the church speak of the same thing in the same way. One quote only. Saint Gregory said that we, regarding this culture, he said that we must listen with all our strength to all the texts of the ancient poets or philosophers, to extract from them the means to deepen and reinforce and propagate the knowledge of truth. Another Holy Father from Alexandria in Egypt, Saint Clement of Alexandria, said this, although it might at first hearing sound scandalous. But he said, a question: who is Plato but Moses speaking Greek? Plato, Aristotle, has left us truths that sometimes seem taken from the Old Testament even. When we talk about this primordial tradition, what are we referring to? To that which some peoples or cultures, thanks to that primitive ancient revelation and even real tradition, had been transmitting from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, and that we know by the name of myths. Myth, not in the negative sense of something you're there somewhere in the clouds, what is it? Forget the word now. Conspiracy, no, something similar to conspiracy. No, not that kind of. In the original sense of the word myth. In Greece, myth was not something invented out of nothing with no meaning at all, or, a lie or something, chimera, there was always something there in the myth that made it attractive, that you recognized. And that is why they taught everything that they taught through myths. The great tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides and Aeschylus were something like actually our liturgical hours. The people were taught even morals and even the history of the Greek people through myths. How did this happen? From generation to generation, these primordial, primitive traditions, if you like, were passed on, as I said. Of course with errors, of course with some spurious elements, myths, legends, poetic images, but nevertheless these myths were part of their religious, the religious understanding had some reality there. It was not fantastical. It was not wholly an invention. Not only had the people received something of these primordial traditions through them, but also they had sometimes manifestations of a certain force, a certain celestial forces. For example, I just told you about the Sibyl of Tivoli. Where did she get that from? I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I don't want you to think that I'm saying that she was like the prophet Isaiah or something, but just put yourself there, okay? Where did she get the inspiration from to say that in a place in the empire of a virgin was to be born the Son of God? Okay, let's talk about some examples that were taken by the first apostles to evangelize. Let's see these Semina Verbi, these seeds of the word, and where they can be found in the Greco-Roman world. First of all, something that you might find strange. I'm talking all the time, I'm saying strange things, but this is something that you will probably not agree with, but the Greeks and the Romans were not polytheists. No, what? Of course they were. You have so many gods. Yeah, Apollo, Athena. No, they were not. They were actually monotheists, one God. Any serious student today of the Greco-Roman world accepts that there were many gods, yeah, Venus, Apollo, Jupiter, Zeus. Okay. Only one God. What do you mean? What do I mean, only one God? As Israel maintained by pure divine design the memory and the teaching about God, of the true God, the peoples of the post-deluge era had been gradually dispersed, okay, from this primordial tradition, and therefore from the idea that there was only one God, one ruler, one governor of all, and little by little these beliefs were mixed and contaminated with other various beliefs, human inventions, whatever, okay? So that first idea of only one transcendent God got all mixed up, but it's there in the background. Over time, as they united to fight and to conquer, and naturally all these beliefs were merging, mixing with each other, and little by little were leaving aside that initial primordial truth that their ancestors had known. I'm going to move on. Okay. So the Greco-Roman world, so closely linked to each other, Zeus and Jupiter are the same gods, yeah? Understood that although the people understood that although there were many gods, there was nevertheless a hierarchy of gods, a heavenly celestial hierarchy. There was one supreme divinity that governed the rest of the gods, who in turn were followed down below by other inferior divinities, intermediate spiritual beings, which were called demonies, from where we get the word demon, but not in that sense, not in a negative sense. They were spiritual beings, yeah, spiritual creatures, not human, but spiritual, that actually participate in the lives of men, sometimes for good, sometimes for evil. So, for example, if sometime this is interesting, if you ever read that great little book, Socrates' Apologia, beautiful text by Plato, where he writes about the death of Socrates, yeah? He says that Socrates says that he never had a divine intervention from God, that God never spoke to him directly, but he had a demon, that is a spiritual entity, okay, who was guiding him in a negative way, not in an evil way, in a negative way, in that he never told him what he should do, but he always told him what he shouldn't do. We can think of it as conscience, perhaps, but this is the way they understood it, okay? So he always told him what he shouldn't do. In many cases, we see that when he says, I'm going to be sentenced to death, and he accepts it, the truth must reign, and so on. It's like a martyr of the Old Testament, to the paying homage to the truth of one only God, of a monotheistic God. There is only one God. And because he says there is only one God, this is old Socrates, he is accused of being an atheist. What do you mean an atheist? Because he says that there is only one God, and so he's denying all the other gods, and that's enough to be an atheist. Yes, they also accused the first Christians of atheism and killed them, with many of them, with the crime of atheism. Is the same thing, because they affirmed that there was only one sole divinity. And what did the Greeks say about this? They said that Zeus, or Jupiter, was the father of all the other gods. So listen to this. When Cicero was going to be killed or murdered, he's going to say a very, very famous sentence. He's not going to say Kyrie eleison. Obviously, he's not a Christian. But he says a very beautiful phrase. He says in Latin, Pater deorum hominumque miserere me. Father of gods and men, have mercy on me. He didn't pray to all the gods. He prayed to the Father of the gods. There's a famous scholar, Walter Otto, great scholar of the Greeks and Greek culture, and he himself affirmed too that the Greeks were actually monotheistic, but that they personified the diverse divine attributes of God upon those inferior divinities. And so, for example, in the Olympic pantheon, one could see the diverse representations of the various personifications of one sole God. So, for the Greeks, Pallas Athena meant divine wisdom. Aphrodite actually was the love that God has for man. I know that now has different interpretations, but that was what it was. Ares was what is of warrior in God, the God of hosts, yes, of armies. We say in the Catholic Mass, God Sabaoth, yeah. It is true that this is not always the position or the understanding of all the fathers of the Church. However, Saint Augustine and Dante himself believe also that in this culture the pagan gods were understood simply as angelic creatures. That is, there was only one God, and then there were angels, and then the demons, and men. For Dante, the intermediate gods, who are not the supreme God, are simply inferior divinities. Perhaps what we now call angels, actually. Beings that are between the corporeal and the divine, the angelic beings. But many fathers of the Church, however, some especially during the time of the persecutions in the first 4 centuries of Christianity, were not really in agreement, and they didn't accept this. And some explicitly said that the pagan gods were demons in the way that we understand the word today. St. Paul says something that actually sounds harsh, but he says that he's talking about the pagan gods, and sometimes he's misunderstood because he's saying about the statues the people were worshipping, the gold and the silver, and that you should not worship, that thing there. He's not referring to what that represented, but for many people it did not represent anything. For many people they would be actually worshipping those things. He's, in other words, talking about idolatrous gods, meaning worshipping the gods, those gods made of gold and silver and so on. Okay. When he goes to the forum, well, not the forum in Rome, the Areopagus, I think it's called, in Greece, to preach there in Athens. You probably remember this passage. He arrives in Athens, goes to the Areopagus, the public square, where people are debating politics, philosophy, and he's going to say this, which you can read in the Acts of the Apostles. He says, "Athenians, I see you are by all means the most respectful with divinities. On passing and contemplating your sacred monuments, I have found an altar in which it was engraved this expression: to the unknown God, agnosto Theo. An altar where there was no image, simply this inscription: to the unknown God. Well then, continued St. Paul, what you worship without knowing, that I come to announce to you. The God that made the world, the Lord of heaven, and so on, that he created from one sole principle the whole of human lineage, all of us. He lived on earth, and so on. Okay. I'm going to jump here a little bit. God overlooking the... we're not to think divinity is something similar to gold, silver, or stone, modeled by human art or imagination, he says. God, overlooking the times of ignorance, announces now to men that in all places must convert, because he has fixed the day when he will judge the world according to justice by the man he has destined. This God I come to preach to you, that God was made man, died and resurrected. Funny enough, when they heard about all this, they didn't have any problem with that. The only thing that they had problem with was this resurrection bit. Up to that point, everything was fine, but when they got to the resurrection, they thought, I'm not sure about that. A little bit too much. Go away. Except for a Dionysius and others, a few others that followed him. So the first Christians in the Greco-Roman world are going to be this initial group that stay with him. Why did they stay with him? What was it? I was just saying that I pointed to the fact that the Greeks didn't have any difficulty in believing that God incarnated of a virgin woman. Why not? They didn't, that's fine, yeah. Because in the Greco-Roman mythology, this was something very common. And, I told you that they taught everything through myths, parables, let's say. It wasn't at all strange. Think of Achilles. Achilles, who is he? Is he a man? Well, yes, he's a man, but more or less. He's not just a man, Achilles isn't. He's a hero. And what is a hero in the Greco-Roman world? It is the fusion between divinity and humanity, between a god, could be a lesser god, and a man, a mortal, or it could be a goddess and a mortal. He's more than man. So many cases like this of the heroes. So there was no difficulty when someone came and said that God was made man and born of a woman. What was the problem with that? They knew the gods intervene in history. In their culture, the god of the Greeks and the Romans was actually a god that was concerned about men, not a god that abandoned the world, now go and do your own thing, through the world like a ball, now deal with it. No. He was, their God was actually concerned with men. Read the Iliad, the history of gods and men. My goodness, Pallas Athena always is looking after the Greeks, over the Trojans, all the time. While in other cultures the gods are distant from men. They are foreign. In the Aztec world, in some Asian cultures, the gods are distant. They created the world, or he created the world, but is distant now. As Borges, the Argentinian writer, said, a God that we see very, very far, far off. And for the Greeks and the Romans, the gods intervened positively in history. They concerned themselves with man. They rewarded him or punished him. That is why they're not going to have any difficulty in listening to a God that pays both good and evil with their measure. And St. Paul uses then these seeds, these Semina Verbi, these traditions, these understandings, to tell them of the incarnation, and it's not going to be strange. They're almost quite ready to understand it. And tells them of the incarnation, of a supreme God who lived among us, whom the Greeks did not yet know, but intuited through the myths. Didn't find it strange. They were almost ready. They are only going to reject it when they hear the word resurrection, because that was something new to a Greek. But these are not only seeds. There is also going to be another one, the anthropomorphism, I can never say the word, of those gods. The Olympic world, Olympus, that is where all the gods lived, is a cosmos. Cosmos means order, chaos means disorder. It's a cosmos well ordered. Zeus at the top. Zeus was the son of Kronos, time, the god time, sovereign over heaven, who rules, Zeus does, over all the gods, and actually does it in a harmonious way. Not violent Zeus. That name Zeus, which will eventually become Deus, God. The root is Theos, God, the divine, the luminous, the brilliant, the resplendent. And to the Roman world, the name will be Jupiter, that is the father of divine light. You, contracted from Zeus in Latin. Zeus is the ray, the light. Both Zeus and Yahweh, with that potency of brilliance of light. They cannot, in either culture, they cannot show themselves. Zeus can't, Yahweh can't show himself to man as they actually are. Zeus will show himself in the form of other beings, Apollo, Dionysius, sometimes a woman, but he cannot show himself as he is. Remember Yahweh. No one can see God and go on living, says Holy Scripture. And that's why Moses and the burning bush. God does not show himself in all his splendor, and that's why the apostles, during the transfiguration of Jesus, cover their eyes. They cannot see God and live. The myths of anthropomorphism also deal with the notion of harmony, proportion, balance, unity, beauty, proper, very much proper of these Greek-Roman gods and of other divinities. And it's very clear there. The opposite, the evil, the bad, lack harmony. They are disproportionate. They are ugly. They are always ugly, unbalanced. That is a sign of an evil or bad divinity, of the bad gods for them. You cannot have, God is beauty. You cannot have the one God, with that is a bad God, a bad divinity, ugliness. That's the representation. The first sort of initial Christian art, the beginnings, represented the image of God the Father according actually to beauty canons, Greek beauty canons, with the proportions of the canons of beauty. For those canons of beauty, Plenitude has the Doric canon of beauty. The canon is that it's not beauty of the face, but the proportioned body, a beautiful anatomy, beautiful body, initially is the 7 heads. In other words, it's about proportion, that your body should have the length of 7 heads. I think I'm lacking 1.5 because I'm short. But it had to be 7 heads initially. That is an artistic canon. 7 heads must enter our body to be proportionate. There will be a second canon, more stylized, and that will be Cyprus, I think it's called, but more slender is 8 heads. Anyway, never mind about that. But I'm talking about beauty and ugliness. So, if you want to know whether you have a perfect body, count how many heads. 7 or 8, you're fine. Anyway, and the gods of this Greco-Roman world will never show themselves to man with figures, zoomorphic figures, animals. Other cultures do. The Indian world from India, or the Native American world, the Chinese, the Aztecs, okay. Their divinities will be different. And we are talking about beauty and proportion, and we are talking about 5th century BC. The gods of the classical world are always represented with beauty because divinity implies beauty. A centaur, a minotaur that sometimes might appear in their literature are always assimilated to referring to deformed passions, perhaps. Too much. So this pattern of harmony is going to also be taken up by the Church at the moment of catechizing. All these Semina Verbi, the seeds of the word, is actually, you see, what I'm saying is that this was a society that was almost ready to hear the good news. It is going to be much more difficult to explain it, for example, to a child who believes that, I don't know, a cow is sacred or something like that. Because there is already in Rome an acceptance of a hierarchical structure, a hierarchical distinction, and this sense of beauty between the divine and this hierarchy of the divine and the human and the animal world. Okay, let me just jump a little bit. Another example. In this world, Greco-Roman world, remember another example, the Pandora's box? That myth was very, very well known in the classical world. When Jupiter made man, the other gods were jealous of man, and they wanted to do the same. They were jealous of him, and they wanted to do the same. Each one contributing something different. And so they brought together all their efforts and all their talents and all their gifts. The word Dora means gift in Greek. Pandora, pan means for all, yeah, in the plural. Gifts for all, okay. So they created a woman named Pandora, formed by all the gifts of all Jupiter to punish their pride, because they had wanted to copy him, gave Pandora a box that contained inside all the evils of the world, and she was to give it to her husband, Epitemis. And she was given this box with the condition that it was not to be opened. But she did, and as she opened it, throughout the world, throughout the earth, spread all the evils, bringing with it the world down to the age of iron. Let me explain. What does all this disobeying the God reminds you of? Genesis. Clearly we find a test here. The paradise, Adam and Eve. There is a test. Do not do this. Yeah. So we have a test here, do we not? Okay. And the Greeks and the Romans talk about this myth much, much earlier than the arrival of Christianity, for sure. According to this myth, this growing of evils made the world cyclical. At the beginning there was a golden age when the gods and man were united, and they walked together in paradise. In Genesis, we read that God walked along Adam and Eve in paradise. It's an expression, yes, but then there is disobedience. And Plato himself said that there is a failure in this origin, this marvelous paradise, and then something happens. There is a failure here. Something went wrong. What was it? I don't know, he said. I don't know what it is, said Plato. But something went wrong. There was a failure. It can be that they see good and they don't do it. They disobey. Something has failed here. And they explained it with this myth of Pandora. In the Golden Age, the gods and men lived in harmony, and there was this failure. We fell from the age of gold down to the age of silver. In this age of silver, there were heroes that still had contained a certain knowledge and memory of the Golden Age, of God, of the gods. But from there we fell to bronze. That was a new fall. And then from bronze we fell down again to iron. But they always had the hope that at a given time, they didn't see history in a linear way as we do, that at a given time, because as I said to them, history was cyclical, not linear, at some time the gods will send redeemers so as to make it possible for us to return to that age of gold. And the people lived longing for that golden age where men could live again in harmony with the gods, and where work was not hard but pleasing. And so that indefinite growing process of evils and more evils make these men long for this new age where they can be with the gods in harmony, that golden age. Another example is the one where we see in the tragedies of Sophocles with Oedipus, for example. Oedipus is the innocent king, you remember, who commits faults, sins, let's say, but not really, without his knowledge, doesn't do it knowingly. You remember his story. He ends up killing his father and marrying his mother. There is an oracle that he's going to kill his father and share a bed with his mother. And Oedipus is the man who carries sins without knowing, that doesn't know he's done so, doesn't know he has committed incest. And the prophecy of Delphi is fulfilled eventually. That was the prophecy that he would kill his mother and commit incest with his mother. And so he killed his father, not knowing he was his father. He thought he was being robbed at a crossroads, yeah? All right. So when he realizes that, he will flee from Thebes. He will be in exile. Okay, there is a beautiful trilogy about it. Okay, so Oedipus pays for a sin that he has not committed. We know that for sin, the will has to be involved. for it to be a sin. So as I said, he thought he was going to be robbed. That is why he kills. It happens to be his father. He didn't know. He carries his sins, though not guilty. What does that remind you of? Last example and conclusion. Okay. In this Greco-Roman world, as in the Christian world, all fault, let's say, has to be paid. Talk about retribution of some sort. There cannot be evil without blame, or a good without glory. They understood, Zeus, the supreme God, considered that someone had to pay for a crime committed against the gods. But the question is, who is going to pay for that debt committed against the gods? That trespass. A man against the gods? A man? How am I going to do that? Because as a man, as a mortal, what can I give to the gods that the gods do not already have? What can I do to pay for that? The solution for antiquity was found in the word mediator. Someone who could mediate between man and the gods. We are not talking about Christianity here, you understand. We're talking about the Greco-Roman pagan world. But to be able to pay for that initial fault against the gods, that mediator could not be more than man, because the debt was unpayable. He couldn't be more than that, but he couldn't be a god either, because the god was innocent. The god was the offended one. The answer, therefore, in this Greco-Roman world was found in that hero of double nature, the son of a goddess, an immortal, or a god, and in between, that mediator. Someone who was man and God at the same time. In this case of an intermediary, a mediator between gods and men, we will find the God and man, the hero of both, that double nature, one soul person, but with two natures, the same and different. That is the son of a god, an immortal, as I said, or the son of a goddess, an immortal. Heir to this unique privilege because of his divine heritage, as was the case of Achilles. The great Roman poet Virgil gave us this to understand in a very short poem in his Eclogues, number 4. These are poems, short poems, and they are rather sort of pastoral. It talks about the fields and the mountains and the rivers and the forest and everything else, okay? The 4th one, he writes about that age of gold that we have to return to, that we wish for, in harmony with the gods, when that time will be restored. I think he was probably inspired. Virgil will write these verses. He lived by the time at the time of the Emperor Augustus. He was actually the writer of the empire. Do you remember that Sibyl, not the one that Augustus went to ask for the oracle, but the other one, very famous one from Cuma, the Cumaean? Okay, so this is what Virgil writes. Now the last age of the Cumaean prophecy begins. The great roll call of the centuries is born anew. Now the Virgin returns and Saturn's reign. Now a new race is sent from the heavens above. From heaven will come a king for future times, though made man, to judge the world. Only favor the child who's born, under whom the first race of iron shall end, and a golden race rise up throughout the world. The golden age, will rise up throughout the world. Now, he's a Roman poet. That man, God, that hero, a mediator, to restore the age of gold. A promised king of heavenly progeny who would come to judge the world. And here we remember Bethlehem. To study history is to study the history of the Church, to study the spouse of Christ, like it or not, because it is impossible to change the past. It is important to know the origins, the womb where the Church settled and has spread with all its limitations, its virtues and its defects in its human character. It was not in any culture or in any region or in any language where the Word of God incarnated. It didn't just happen like that. But it was in that epoch, under such empire, under such cultural development. And not to know these times, this plenitude of time, as St. Paul calls this in his letter to the Galatians, chapter 4, is to be ignorant of its historical and cultural framework, but also to miss the opportunity to try something similar nowadays, to try to start evangelization anew. And to do this in our time, the soil needs to be also fertilized. It has grown dry, much of it not attached to the trunk. Turn the soil again of the first evangelization that was then ready to hear our Lord Jesus Christ being born in the year 0 of our history. The Greco-Roman world, its virtues and its defects and its shortcomings, could now give us an idea of, to teach us how to evangelize by starting to work on a minimum foundation basis, But we need to fertilize it. We need to turn over the ground, as they did, for the world of today. So what I am saying is that by also reading classical literature, understanding their world. Sometimes we hear the Judeo-Christian tradition. We never heard that until the 70s. Because at least in the Catholic world, as I said, the Old Testament is the Old Testament sacred scripture. But the teachings for a Christian are certainly to concentrate on the New Testament. Well, if we are going to keep this Judeo-Christian, which sounds to me Judeo-Protestant, I would say Judeo-Greek-Roman Catholic tradition. Because the Greco-Roman world, although it was to play second fiddle, that's for sure, rocky ground, they had a sense, they had got to that point where even a second fiddle, they could become fertile soil themselves, since the original chosen people had abandoned him. That's my talk for today, and I owe certainly most of it to Father Javier Olivera Ravassi. The next one will be now moving on, okay, to the Christianity being now in Rome. We're going to talk about the Catholic Church and the synagogue. That's going to be very, very interesting. I hope you have enjoyed it. I have no idea how long I've been talking, probably 3 hours. Oh my goodness. Okay, bye-bye.